In this video, we will discuss international financial management. My name is Kirby Arcundiff. I have a Ph.D. from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I'm a chartered financial analyst, a certified financial planner, and currently chair of accounting and financial management at the Graduate School of University of Maryland, University College. Throughout human history, the most common form of money has been some base metal, such as gold or silver. In the 1800s, most countries in the world were on a gold standard, and the same value of gold in one country could be exchanged for the same value of gold in another country, as long as you trusted each country's measurement of gold in their coinage. In the late 1800s, there were pushes against this. For example, in the United States, William Jennings Bryan wanted to push for a gold and silver standard. The main reason for this would be to debase the currency, cause some inflation, and this would make farmers in the Midwest happier since they were in debt to banks. This system existed throughout the United States until after the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, and there was a lot of money printing that was supposed to be backed by gold, but more money was printed by the Fed in the United States than there was gold to back it, inspiring Roosevelt to default on the gold standard in 1933, issuing Executive Order 6102, which made the possession of gold bullion, and gold certificates illegal if they were in excess of 5 pieces of gold. That would be 5 gold coins. All of the individuals in the U.S. were supposed to turn their gold in, and most of the gold held by banks was seized and then put into Fort Knox to back the future U.S. currency. This system existed until the end of World War II. At the end of World War II, something called the Bretton Woods Agreement was created, which was another gold standard, an international agreement created by the victors, the Allies in World War II, but this was not a gold standard for individuals. The previous gold standard in the 1800s, individuals had gold coins, or individuals had gold certificates issued by banks they could then turn into gold. Gold ownership by individuals, at least in the U.S., was still illegal, but the Bretton Woods Agreement was created as an international agreement between international banks where they could exchange gold. The idea behind this was if France, for example, decided that they had too many dollars, they wanted more gold, they would take the dollars and exchange them for gold. And this was all handled by the New York Federal Reserve System. You can still take tours today where you can take an elevator down to the bedrock beneath New York City, and there are jail cells full of gold. So the French would bring in their dollars, gold would be moved from the U.S. jail cell to the French jail cell. If you've watched the movie Die Hard 3, this is what they are attempting to rob. This system existed where all of the world's international currencies were supposed to be pegged to each other, and then the US dollar was pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. Again, as in the post-1913 system, the Federal Reserve printed way too much money to be able to actually back the currency with gold. The French, in fact, called the U.S. on this, exchanged dollars for gold. Eventually, the U.S. did not have enough gold to back the dollars, and they defaulted on the system in the early 1970s when Richard Nixon announced the U.S. would no longer be on the gold standard. So all of this money was printed to finance the Vietnam War, Lyndon Baines Johnson's Great Society program, etc. And then after the international default by the U.S. in 71, we went on a floating currency exchange system where all of the world's currencies are no longer pegged to each other, but instead float against each other. Every day, the dollar will have a different exchange rate against the euro, against the pound, and against the yen. This makes international currency exchange far more difficult. For example, at the writing of this PowerPoint, a dollar could be converted to 0.00043 Bitcoin, 1.32 Canadian dollars, 0.890 euros, are 0.008 that's 3 zeros, 8 gold ounce, etc. There are a variety of different currency exchange systems. As mentioned, most of these are floating. The one at the bottom, the United Arab Emirates dirham at 3.67, is in fact fixed against the US dollar. As a currency exchange rate example of what companies have to deal with when they make profits or losses in multiple different countries with multiple different currencies, we consider looking at a company with a worldwide business operations this month that generated a profit of 1 million euros, 10 million yen, and 20 Bitcoin. If this is repatriated to the US, or at least converted to profits in the US, how many dollars of profits did this company generate? So to calculate this, we have to take the 1 million euros, multiply the exchange rate of $1 per 0.89 euros. It's very important when doing this to keep track of your units so you can see the euros cancel out and you end up in dollars. Add that to 10 million yen multiplied by $1 divided by 111.94 yen. Again, the yen cancels and you're left with dollars. And add 20 Bitcoin multiplied by $1 per 0.00043 Bitcoins. Again, the Bitcoins cancel, you're left with dollars. You add up these three terms, and you end up with a profit of $1,259,442. One of the most important topics when discussing international financial management is interest rate parity. The idea behind interest rate parity is if this formula is not correct, then investors, hedgers, speculators can move money around the world and make a profit without taking on any risk. So we consider two different stable currencies, in this example, the euro and the dollar, and their investments in short-term risk-free government debt. So the government debt is risk-free, so this formula should have to equal this formula. The future value in dollars is the present value in dollars times 1 plus the interest rate in short-term risk-free debt. Since the other side is also risk-free, that would be an investment in US dollars converted to euros at the spot rate, invested in risk-free euros, then the future value in euros is going to be the present value in euros times 1 plus the risk-free interest rate in euros, converted back to dollars using a future in euros per dollars. Futures are sold by organizations like the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and they are AAA rated and basically also risk-free. So we have a risk-free investment multiplied by another risk-free investment. Therefore, these two equations have to equal each other. Otherwise, you could make a risk-free profit by converting from one currency to another and signing a future. If we rearrange this equation, then we would end up with the future value in euros per dollar equals the spot value in euros per dollar times 1 plus the risk-free investment in European government debt divided by 1 plus the risk-free investment in US government T-bills. So this is called the interest rate parity equation and is generally true since it is very easy to move currency from one country to another. We will now do an interest rate parity example. Consider if 1 year government debt yields in euros a negative 0.05%. In Europe, they do have negative interest rates, so you in many ways are penalized for saving. And the risk-free rate of the United States is 1.2%, which also penalizes you for savings since that's below the inflation rate, but it's at least not negative in nominal terms. Then we would ask, what is the exchange rate for 1 year in the future? So what does the future have to be traded for on the Chicago Board of Trade for there not to be an arbitrage? And that has to equal the spot rate in euros per dollar times 1 plus the risk-free rate in euros divided by 1 plus the risk-free rate in dollars. are 0.890 euros per dollar times 1 minus 0.005 divided by 1 plus 0.012, which gives a future exchange rate of 0.875 euros per dollar. So over this time period, the euro in fact becomes less valuable or depreciates versus the dollar since it has a worse or more negative interest rate. This would also tend over the long run to create more inflation in Europe than in the United States. Another important equation for international currency relations is purchasing power parity. Unlike interest rate parity, purchasing power parity is commonly not true. The reason for this is currencies can be moved from country to country, but in many cases, goods, services, and labor cannot be. If we had a free market and goods, services, and labor could actually move around the world, then purchasing power parity would have to be close to being true, otherwise you would create an arbitrage. For example, if gold is more expensive in one country to another, you would just purchase it in one country, sell it in another country, and make a profit, and then the gold exchange rate would be the same in each country. So the purchasing power parity equation is the value of a dollar, the price of something in dollars, for example, gold, is the exchange rate in dollars per euro times the price of that item in euros. So price of gold in euros times the exchange rate of dollars per euro should equal the price of gold in dollars. So as mentioned, interest rate parity is generally true, but purchasing power parity is not. For example, things like pharmaceuticals and physician services are much cheaper outside the United States because it is illegal to purchase a drug outside the US and then arbitrage it by selling it in the US. And physicians who are licensed in Dubai or China or some other country cannot easily move to the US and practice their services due to licensing laws. This results in Americans paying far more for healthcare than they would under an international free market system. Similarly, when I worked in Dubai, things like clothing and electronics were way more expensive in Dubai. A $20 or $40 pair of Nikes in the US would be $200 in Dubai, but it is not legal for me to purchase Nikes in the US and then try and sell them in Dubai, which of course makes things more expensive for people in Dubai. So a free market worldwide would generally lower costs for more people, raise standards of living, and make purchasing power parity true, but it is not true due to all of the borders controls around the world. Examples of legal restrictions on trade include in 2017, Trump slapped tariffs on Canadian lumber. As a result, Americans pay more for lumber than Canadians. The Obama administration was very interested in protecting the pharmaceutical monopoly in the United States and indicted both FedEx and UPS for trying to bring in cheaper overseas meds. In 2002, George Bush also placed tariffs on foreign steel, making Americans pay more for steel than Europeans. This drastically hurt many of the small businesses in Michigan. I had students whose family owned them, and as a result of this, their input steel charges went up, but they could not sell their products to the big three in GM, Chrysler, and Ford at any higher rate, so the steel tariffs drastically squeezed their products. One of the students' families actually sponsored a $20,000 a plate dinner to attempt to talk to George Bush about this issue. He came for the money, did a photo op with the student, refused to discuss the issue, and then left. Also, as noted earlier, from 1933 to 1977, it was illegal for Americans to own gold, which would affect the gold price in the US versus the world. The James Bond film Goldfinger briefly mentions this issue. As an extreme example of violations of purchasing power parity, I look at an example familiar to those of us who get sinus infections, Nasonex, which is a nasal spray that helps prevent sinus infections, and it's available for sale over the counter in Dubai for 72 UAE dirhams. It's available even cheaper for the equivalent of $5 in Istanbul. In the US, on the other hand, you are required to have a script, and the cost of Nasonex in the US with that script is $350 per bottle. So if purchasing power parity was true, we would take the 72 UAE dirhams, divide by the conversion rate of 3.67 dirhams per dollar, and we would come up with the US equivalent rate should be $20 per bottle. Drastically different than the $350. The only thing that allows the company to sell it for this ridiculous price in the US is the US very much protects the pharmaceutical industry from international competition. As mentioned earlier, countries like Dubai protect other areas. For example, Nike tennis shoes cost $40 in the US, but $200 in Dubai. When I first took a position of a chair of business at the Rochester Institute of Technology in Dubai, I was flying over, it was raining, I took an old pair of tennis shoes thinking I would just replace them in Dubai, and when I went to the store, I was rather shocked at the replacement cost. One of the ways internationally of showing violations of purchasing power parity is the Big Mac Index, which shows the cost of the Big Mac in each country converted to US dollars. So in this case, probably the major contributing cost difference between the countries is going to be the cost of labor, issues such as the minimum wage in each country, and not necessarily the cost of burgers or the bun, or for the Big Mac meal, I guess, the potatoes. So we can see at the time of the creation of these PowerPoints in 2017, Switzerland had the most expensive Big Mac at 6.35. The US was 5.06. These differences are not as drastic as they have been in the past, but again, this is probably due to the fact that the cost of labor in Switzerland is higher than the United States. Norway, this is a relatively cheap product. If you go to Norway, a 12-pack of beer is about $50, and filling up the tank of gas for a small Honda might be $100. They also have a 300% import tax on vehicles. So Big Macs are a lot closer than other items in price to the US. Over time, even though purchasing power parity is violated, labor costs do tend to go up in the low labor cost countries. For example, they are going up in China. So over the very long run, purchasing power parity does tend to become true, but over the short run, there are a lot of variations. Obviously, Mexicans who are not making much money in Mexico do attempt to come to the US, whether legally or illegally, for higher wages. And of course, Americans do tend to go overseas now, in many cases, to attempt to get cheaper healthcare. More examples on the utterly cheap side, a Big Mac in Egypt, labor costs are pretty cheap, is $1.48, Ukraine $1.54, Russia $2.15. When a company invests overseas, they not only have to worry about issues such as currency fluctuations, they also have to worry about issues such as whether the government will seize their business, whether very high taxes will take away their property, whether very high labor costs will make it impossible for them to make money. A way of examining countries and comparing them on these issues is an index of economic freedom, which are published by organizations such as the Heritage Foundation and the Fraser Institution. The country that almost always has shown up on the top of these has been Hong Kong. Of course, recent riots and problems with China may change this. Other countries with very high economic freedom, meaning good property rights, relatively low taxes, contracts are honored, etc., include Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, Switzerland, Canada, Chile, Mauritius, Denmark, and the United States. The US used to be very high on this, but has dropped some in the last 10 years. Here is an example worldwide. You can show the countries with very high economic freedom in green, and the countries that are extremely repressed in red. For example, you might be able to get very low labor costs in the Belgian Congo, or the Democratic Republic of Congo today, but they do not honor property rights. The odds are your factory may be destroyed, and you may not be able to get your profits out of that country, so it is still not a good investment. Examples of overseas problems with investment risk would include the many problems that have happened with the oil companies. For example, between 74 and 76, the Indian government nationalized Esso, Burma Shell, and Caltech, which were wholly owned subsidiaries of foreign oil companies. So these foreign companies had invested a lot of money in those countries, a lot of resources, and just had those resources seized. The same thing happened in 1951 when Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized Anglo-Iranian oil company owned by British Petroleum. As a result of this, the CIA and British intelligence overthrew the democratically elected Mossadegh and stuck in the US-backed dictator, the Shah of Iran. Also in 1938, the Mexican president ordered the seizure of all assets of foreign oil companies in Mexico. So oil companies don't have the best reputation, but if they invest billions of dollars in foreign companies and they just lose it, that's obviously a problem for their profitability. Similar things happened in Russia with the so-called White Knights that attempted to go in after the Berlin Wall came down. In that case, I don't believe their assets were directly seized, but the taxation levels at the local, state, and federal level were so high that if they made any profit, they actually lost it through taxation. They, of course, pulled out of Russia. I thank you for watching this video on international financial management.